On a chilly January evening, a well-dressed young man strolled down Davis Road, making his way to Mall Road, and then turned toward Charing Cross, walking leisurely along the tracks. The young man appeared quite fashionable, with his sharp features and polished appearance. His long, sleek hair shimmered, and his thin mustache looked as if it had been delicately drawn with a kohl pencil. He wore a beige overcoat, with a half-bloomed rose in a soft pink shade pinned to its lapel. A green flat hat sat tilted at a jaunty angle on his head, and a white scarf was wrapped snugly around his neck. One hand rested in his coat pocket, while the other held a small cane, which he occasionally twirled in a playful manner. It was a Saturday evening, deep into the winter season. The cold, biting wind cut through the air like a sharp blade, but the young man seemed unaffected by it. While others hurried along, briskly walking to keep warm, he appeared to relish the crisp winter air, strolling as if he were enjoying every moment of it. His demeanor exuded a certain charm, so much so that horse-drawn carriage drivers, spotting him from a distance, would eagerly steer their horses toward him, hoping for a fare. But with a simple wave of his cane, he would politely decline. An empty taxi also pulled over for him, but he dismissed it with a courteous, "No, thank you." As he approached the livelier section of Mall Road, his spirits seemed to rise. He began whistling an English tune, his feet tapping lightly to the rhythm. At one point, when no one was around, he even broke into a playful jog, mimicking a cricket bowler's motion as if he were in the middle of a match. He passed a road that led to Lawrence Garden, but the garden, shrouded in the evening mist and heavy fog, seemed to exude a melancholic aura. He chose not to venture that way and continued straight toward Charing Cross. As he neared the statue of the Queen, his movements became more composed. He pulled out a handkerchief, which he had tucked into his left coat sleeve instead of his pocket, and gently wiped his face to remove any dust that might have settled. Nearby, a group of English children were playing with a large ball on a patch of grass. He watched them with interest for a while, but as he moved closer, the children grew shy and eventually ran off, laughing and chasing each other. The young man's gaze fell on an empty cement bench, and he sat down. The evening darkness deepened, and the cold grew more intense, but it was a cold that seemed to invite indulgence rather than discomfort. The city's pleasure-seeking class thrived in such weather, and even those who usually kept to themselves were drawn out of their corners, seeking the warmth of crowds and gatherings. The pursuit of pleasure had brought many to Mall Road, where they enjoyed themselves in restaurants, coffee houses, dance halls, cinemas, and other entertainment venues. Mall Road was bustling with activity. Cars, carriages, and bicycles lined the streets, and the sidewalks were crowded with pedestrians. The shops on either side of the road were alive with the buzz of commerce. Those who couldn't afford the luxuries of entertainment or shopping stood at a distance, content to soak in the colorful lights of the shops and entertainment venues. The young man sat on the bench, observing the men and women passing by. His attention was drawn more to their attire than their faces. Among the crowd were people of all kinds, wealthy merchants, government officials, leaders, artists, college students, nurses, newspaper representatives, and office clerks. Most wore overcoats, ranging from expensive fur-lined ones to old military coats bought at auctions. His own overcoat, though somewhat old, was made of fine fabric and tailored by an expert. It was clear that he took great care of it. The collar was perfectly pressed, the sleeves neatly creased, and the buttons gleamed brightly. He seemed quite pleased with his appearance. A boy selling betel leaves and cigarettes passed by, and the young man called out to him, "Pan seller." "Yes, sir." "Do you have change for 10? "No, but I can get it. What would you like?" "Ah, don't worry. I'm not a thief who'll run off. If you don't trust me, come along. What will you have?" No, I'll get the change myself. Here's a nickel. Give me a gold flake cigarette and you can go." After the boy left, the young man enjoyed his cigarette, taking slow, deliberate puffs. The smoke seemed to envelop him in a state of bliss. A small white cat, shivering from the cold, approached him and began meowing at his feet. He picked it up, and it jumped onto the bench. He gently stroked its back and said, "Poor little soul." After a moment, he stood up, crossed the road, and headed toward the brightly lit cinema. The show had already started, and the lobby was mostly empty, save for a few people examining posters of upcoming films. The posters, displayed on several boards, showcased key scenes from the movies. 3 young Anglo-Indian girls were eagerly looking at the posters. The young man observed them from a distance, maintaining a respectful demeanor. The girls chatted and laughed among themselves, occasionally commenting on the films. After a while, they left, still laughing. The young man lingered for a bit before exiting the cinema. It was now 7 o'clock, and he resumed his leisurely stroll along Mall Road. A restaurant nearby had an orchestra playing, and while the inside was lively, the outside was even more crowded. Drivers, fruit sellers with empty baskets, and a few laborers and beggars stood quietly, listening to the music. Though the tune was unfamiliar, they seemed captivated. The young man paused briefly before moving on. A little further down the road, he noticed a large music store and walked in without hesitation. The store was filled with glass cases displaying various English musical instruments. On a long table were sheet music books featuring the latest Western tunes. He glanced at them briefly before turning his attention to the instruments. He examined a Spanish guitar hanging on a hook, read its price tag, and then moved to a grand German piano. He lifted the lid, ran his fingers lightly over the keys, and then closed it again. A store attendant approached him. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" "No, thank you. But could you give me this month's gramophone record catalog?" He took the catalog, tucked it into his coat pocket, and left the store. As he walked, he passed a small bookstall and stopped to browse through some recent magazines. He flipped through the pages carefully, always placing them back exactly as he found them. Further down the road, a carpet shop caught his attention. The shopkeeper, dressed in a long robe and a turban, greeted him warmly. "I'd like to take a look at that Persian carpet. No need to take it down. I'll just look at it here. What's the price?" $1,430. The young man raised an eyebrow, signaling that the price was steep. The shopkeeper said, "Please, take your time. We can offer a discount if you're interested." "Thank you, but I'm just browsing for now." "Feel free to look around. It's your shop." After a few minutes, he left the store. The half-bloomed rose on his lapel had shifted slightly, and as he adjusted it, a faint, mysterious smile appeared on his lips. He continued his stroll. He now found himself passing by the High Court buildings. Despite having walked quite a distance, his energy hadn't waned. He felt neither tired nor bored. The crowd on the sidewalk had thinned somewhat. He tried to twirl his cane on a single finger but failed, and it fell to the ground. "Oh, sorry," he muttered, bending down to pick it up. At that moment, a young couple who had been walking behind him passed by. The man was tall, wearing black trousers and a zippered leather jacket, while the woman was dressed in a white satin skirt and a green coat. She had a heavy build, and her long black hair was tied in a braid that reached past her waist. The young man found the couple intriguing and couldn't help but follow them at a distance. The couple walked in silence for a while before the man suddenly spoke. "Listen to me," he said in a tone of advice. "The doctor is my friend. No one will know." "No, no, no," the woman replied sharply. "I'm telling you, you won't feel a thing." The woman said something in response. "Think about how much it would hurt your father. Have some respect for his honor." "Shut up, or I'll go mad." The young man had seen many faces during his evening stroll, but none had captured his attention like this couple. There was something about them that fascinated him, and he felt an intense desire to hear more of their conversation and get a closer look at them. They soon reached the intersection near the general post office. The couple paused briefly before crossing the street and heading toward McLeod Road. The young man stayed on Mall Road, perhaps thinking that following them immediately might arouse suspicion. He decided to wait a moment. When the couple had moved about 100 yards ahead, he quickened his pace to catch up. But as he crossed the street, a truck loaded with bricks came speeding from behind, hitting him and dragging him along McLeod Road. The driver, hearing the young man scream, slowed down momentarily, but then sped away into the night. A few bystanders who witnessed the accident shouted, "Get the license plate number!" But the truck was already gone. Soon, a crowd gathered. A traffic inspector on a motorcycle stopped to assess the situation. The young man's legs were crushed, and he was bleeding profusely, gasping for breath. A car was quickly flagged down, and he was rushed to the nearest hospital. By the time he arrived, he was barely alive. Hey everyone, if you're still enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing narrations. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me keep bringing you more awesome content. Let's get back to the story now. In the hospital's accident ward, Assistant Surgeon Mr. Khan and two young nurses, Miss Shehnaz and Miss Gul, were on duty. As the young man was wheeled into the operating room on a stretcher, the nurses noticed his beige overcoat still draped over his body and a white silk scarf around his neck. His clothes were stained with blood, and someone had placed his green flat hat on his chest to keep it from being blown away. Shehnaz whispered to Gul, "He seems like he's from a good family, poor thing." Gul replied softly, "He must have been out enjoying his Saturday evening." "Did they catch the driver?" "No, he got away." "What a tragedy." In the operating room, the surgeon and nurses, their faces masked, worked diligently to save him. He was placed on a marble table, and the faint scent of the fragrant oil he had used in his hair still lingered. His legs were shattered, but his hair remained neatly combed. As they began to remove his clothes, the nurses noticed something unusual. Beneath his silk scarf, there was no shirt collar, in fact, no shirt at all. When they removed his overcoat, they found a worn-out woolen sweater full of holes. Through the holes, an even more tattered undershirt was visible. The young man had wrapped the scarf in such a way that it concealed his chest, which was covered in layers of dirt. It seemed he hadn't bathed in at least 2 months, though his neck was clean and lightly powdered. Next, they removed his trousers, which were held up by an old piece of string instead of a belt. The buttons and zipper were missing, and the fabric around the knees was worn thin and torn in several places. His boots, though polished, revealed mismatched socks, both of which were torn, exposing his dirty heels. By this point, the young man had likely passed away. His body lay lifeless on the marble table, his face turned toward the wall, as if ashamed of his nakedness before his fellow humans. From the pockets of his overcoat, they retrieved the following items: a small black comb, a handkerchief, 6.5 cents, a burnt-out cigarette, a small diary with names and addresses, a monthly catalog of new gramophone records, and some advertisements that had been handed to him during his stroll, which he had tucked into his coat pocket. Sadly, the cane he had been carrying was nowhere to be found. Type in the comment section, what do you think about the lesson of this story?